The dust kicked up around Jake Morrison's boots as he rode into the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge on a scorching Tuesday morning in 1882. His weathered face showed years of hard living under the Arizona sun, and his piercing blue eyes had seen more trouble than most men twice his age. Jake had been riding alone for 3 months, moving cattle from ranch to ranch, earning just enough money to keep his horse fed and his belly from growling. As he approached the town square, something felt wrong. The usual bustle of morning activity was replaced by an eerie silence. Shop owners stood in their doorways whispering to each other, and children were nowhere to be seen. Jake's horse, a sturdy mare named Duchess, seemed to sense the tension too, her ears twitching nervously. Near the old oak tree in the center of town, a crowd had gathered. Jake could hear angry voices rising above the murmur. He dismounted and tied Duchess to a hitching post, then pushed his way through the crowd to see what had captured everyone's attention. What he saw made his blood run cold. 7 young Apache women, their ages ranging from what looked like 16 to 25, stood with their hands bound behind their backs. Rough hemp ropes hung around their necks, and they were positioned beneath the thick branch of the oak tree. Their dark eyes showed no fear, only defiance, but Jake could see the exhaustion in their faces. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a large man with a permanent scowl, stood before the crowd holding a piece of paper. "These here Apache women," he shouted, "have been found guilty of stealing cattle from the Johnson Ranch and attacking innocent settlers. The law is clear about what happens to cattle thieves and murderers." Jake studied the 7 women more carefully. The eldest appeared to be the leader, her chin raised high despite her circumstances. The youngest looked barely old enough to be away from her mother's side. Something about the whole situation struck Jake as wrong. In his years on the frontier, he had dealt with many Apache bands, and while some were hostile, most were simply trying to survive as their traditional lands were taken away. "What evidence do you have?" Jake called out, his voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. Sheriff Bradley turned toward him with irritation. "And who might you be, stranger?" "Jake Morrison. I'm just passing through, but I've got eyes and a brain. What proof do you have these women committed any crimes?" The sheriff's face reddened. "We found them near the Johnson Ranch after the attack. That's proof enough for me." Jake stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Being near a place isn't the same as committing a crime there. Did anyone actually see them do anything wrong?" A murmur went through the crowd. Some people nodded in agreement with Jake, while others grumbled about interfering strangers. Jake noticed a well-dressed man in a black suit standing near the sheriff. The man had the soft hands of someone who had never done hard labor, and his eyes held a coldness that made Jake's skin crawl. "I'm Marcus Whitfield," the man in the suit announced. "I represent the territorial government in these matters. These Apache women are dangerous criminals, and they will face justice today." Jake had heard of Marcus Whitfield. The man had a reputation for grabbing land from Native American tribes through questionable legal means. He owned several large ranches in the territory and had been pushing for the complete removal of all Apache people from the region. "If they're such dangerous criminals," Jake said, "why aren't they being tried in a proper court? Why the rush to hang them?" Whitfield's eyes narrowed. "The evidence is overwhelming, Mr. Morrison. These women were found with stolen cattle, and weapons were discovered in their possession. Several settlers can identify them as the attackers." Jake looked at the 7 women again. None of them carried themselves like cattle rustlers or killers. The youngest was trembling slightly, not from fear but from what looked like hunger and exhaustion. The eldest woman caught his eye and spoke in accented English. "We did not steal cattle," she said quietly. "We were traveling to find our brother. He works at the silver mine near Tucson." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward angrily. "Shut your mouth, Apache. You've said enough lies already." Jake felt his temper rising. "Let her speak." If you're so sure of their guilt, what harm could it do to hear their side? The woman continued, her voice steady despite the rope around her neck. My name is Ayana. These are my sisters. We left our reservation 3 days ago because we received word that our brother was hurt in the mine. We have papers showing we are allowed to travel. Papers can be forged, Whitfield said quickly. And even if they're real, that doesn't explain why they were found with stolen cattle. Jake studied Whitfield's face carefully. The man seemed very eager to end this conversation and proceed with the hangings. Where exactly were they found? And where are these stolen cattle now? Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably. They were camped near the Johnson place. The cattle had already been moved by the time we arrived. So you found 7 women camping, with no cattle in sight, and you decided they must be cattle thieves? Jake's voice carried a mix of disbelief and anger. The crowd was beginning to murmur more loudly. Some people were starting to ask their own questions. Jake could see doubt creeping into their faces. Whitfield stepped forward again. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your concern for justice, but you don't understand the situation here. These Apache have been raiding settlements for months. We can't afford to show weakness. Jake moved closer to the 7 women, studying their faces and clothing. He had spent enough time around different tribes to recognize certain details. These women wore traditional Apache clothing, but it was clean and well-maintained, not the rough gear of raiders living in the wilderness. Their hands showed calluses from normal work, not from handling weapons or rustling cattle. More importantly, Jake noticed something that made his suspicions grow stronger. 3 of the women wore small silver crosses around their necks, and one had a small leather pouch that he recognized as a medicine bag used for healing herbs, not weapons or war paint. Sheriff, Jake said, his voice carrying across the square, I've got a proposal. Give me 24 hours to investigate this situation properly. If I can't find evidence that proves their innocence, I won't interfere with your justice. The crowd fell silent. Sheriff Bradley looked uncertain, glancing between Jake and Whitfield. The man in the black suit's face had gone pale. That's ridiculous, Whitfield said quickly. Justice delayed is justice denied. These women are guilty, and they should hang today. Jake smiled grimly. If they're so obviously guilty, Mr. Whitfield, then 24 hours won't change anything, will it? Unless there's something you're afraid I might find. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Jake could see the wheels turning in people's minds. If Whitfield was so certain of the women's guilt, why would he be afraid of a simple investigation? Sheriff Bradley found himself caught between the crowd's growing uncertainty and Whitfield's obvious anger. After several tense moments, he cleared his throat and made his decision. All right, Morrison. You've got until this time tomorrow. But these women stay locked up, and if you can't prove they're innocent, they hang at dawn. Jake nodded grimly. Fair enough. But I want to talk to them first. And I want to see all the evidence you claim to have. Whitfield's face had turned red with fury, but he couldn't object without looking suspicious to the crowd. Fine, he snapped. But don't think this changes anything. These Apache women are guilty, and one day won't change that fact. As the crowd began to disperse, Jake helped the sheriff escort the 7 women to the small jail behind the courthouse. The building was barely large enough for 3 prisoners, let alone 7, but it would have to do. Once they were secured, Jake sat down across from Ayana, the eldest sister. Tell me everything, he said quietly. Start from the beginning. Ayana's English was better than he had expected. She explained that she and her sisters lived on the San Carlos reservation, where life was hard but peaceful. Their brother, Naalnish, had left 6 months earlier to work in the silver mines near Tucson, sending money back to help support their family. 3 days ago, a Mexican trader came to the reservation, she continued. He said Naalnish had been hurt in a mine collapse and was asking for his sisters. He gave us this letter. She gestured toward a small piece of paper that had been taken from her when she was arrested. Jake asked the sheriff to bring it, and when he read it, his suspicions grew stronger. The letter was written in English, supposedly from her brother, but something about the handwriting and word choices seemed wrong. "Can your brother write in English?" Jake asked. "A little," Ayanna replied. "But this letter, it doesn't sound like him. The words are too fancy, and he would never call us by our American names instead of our Apache names." Jake studied the letter more carefully. It was written on expensive paper, the kind used by businessmen and government officials, not minors. The handwriting was too neat and educated for someone who worked with his hands in dangerous mines. "Tell me about when you were captured," Jake said. The youngest sister, who looked about 16, spoke up for the first time. "We were sleeping near a stream, maybe 2 miles from the Johnson Ranch. We had been traveling for 2 days and were tired. Men with guns surrounded us while we slept." "How many men?" Jake asked. 6 or 7, Ayanna answered. "They were not soldiers or lawmen. Some spoke Spanish, others English. They tied us up and said we were under arrest for stealing cattle." Jake frowned. "Did you see any cattle, either before you were arrested or during your capture?" "No cattle," said another sister. "Only our horses and the few supplies we brought for the journey." Jake left the jail and went to find Sheriff Bradley, who was drinking coffee in his office. "Sheriff, I need to see this evidence you mentioned, the weapons and proof they were stealing cattle." Bradley looked uncomfortable. "Well, the weapons were just a couple of old hunting knives. Nothing unusual for people traveling alone. And the cattle, like I said, they were gone by the time we got there." "Gone where?" "Cattle don't just disappear. If they were stolen, there should be tracks, signs of where they went." The sheriff shifted in his chair. "Whitfield's men handled most of the investigation. You'd have to ask him about the details." Jake's suspicions were now certainties. "Sheriff, how long have you known Marcus Whitfield?" "He's been in the territory about 2 years, bought up several ranches, has big plans for development. He's got connections in the territorial capital." "And he's been pushing hard to remove the Apache from this area." Bradley nodded slowly. "He says it's for safety, but between you and me, I think it's more about the land. There are rumors of silver deposits in the mountains where some Apache bands still live." Jake spent the rest of the afternoon riding out to the Johnson Ranch, where the supposed cattle theft had taken place. What he found there confirmed his worst fears about what was really happening. The Johnson Ranch was indeed missing cattle, but the more Jake investigated, the stranger the story became. He talked to the ranch hands, and their stories didn't match what Sheriff Bradley had told him. According to the workers, the cattle had disappeared 3 days before the Apache women were even arrested. More importantly, Jake found tracks around the ranch that told a different story. The missing cattle had been driven south toward Mexico, not north toward Apache territory. The hoof prints were accompanied by the tracks of shod horses, the kind ridden by white men, not the unshod ponies typically used by Apache. As Jake followed the trail, he came across something that made his blood boil. Hidden in a grove of trees about 5 miles from the Johnson Ranch, he found a temporary camp that had been used recently. The remains of cooking fires, horse droppings, and other signs showed that several men had stayed there for at least 2 days. But what really caught Jake's attention were the items scattered around the abandoned camp. He found a piece of paper with Marcus Whitfield's name written on it, along with what looked like a list of names and locations. At the bottom of the list were the names of several Apache families, including Ayanna and her sisters. Jake also discovered something that made the whole plot clear. Hidden under a pile of rocks, he found a small bag of silver ore, the kind that came from mines in the territory. Attached to the bag was a note that read, "Payment for Services, M.W." As the sun began to set, Jake realized he had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple case of mistaken identity. Marcus Whitfield wasn't just trying to get rid of a few Apache women. He was orchestrating a systematic campaign to drive all Native Americans from the territory, using false accusations and manufactured evidence. The cattle theft was just a convenient excuse. Whitfield's men had probably stolen the cattle themselves, then blamed it on the Apache women who happened to be traveling through the area at the wrong time. The seven sisters were supposed to be examples, their execution serving as a warning to other Apache that they weren't safe anywhere in the territory. Jake rode back to town as darkness fell, his mind working on how to expose Whitfield's plot. He knew that simply presenting the evidence might not be enough. Whitfield had money, influence, and connections. He could easily claim that Jake had planted the evidence or was lying to protect the Apache women. What Jake needed was a way to make Whitfield reveal himself, to trap the man in his own lies before witnesses who couldn't be bought or intimidated. As he stabled Duchess for the night, a plan began to form in his mind. The next morning would bring more than just a hanging. If Jake's plan worked, it would expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond 7 innocent women and change the future of the entire territory. But if it failed, not only would Ayanna and her sisters die, but Jake himself might not live to see another sunset. Time was running out, and Jake Morrison had never faced odds this dangerous in his life. Jake Morrison barely slept that night. By dawn, he had finalized his plan to expose Marcus Whitfield's conspiracy, but it would require perfect timing and a good deal of luck. As the sun rose over Cedar Ridge, townspeople began gathering in the square again, expecting to witness the hanging of the 7 Apache sisters. Jake arrived early and positioned himself near the jail. He had spent the pre-dawn hours setting his trap, and now everything depended on Whitfield taking the bait. When the businessman arrived with several of his men, Jake was ready. "Mr. Whitfield," Jake called out loudly enough for nearby townspeople to hear. "I've completed my investigation. You were right about these women being involved in criminal activity." Whitfield's eyes lit up with satisfaction, but Jake could see wariness there too. "I told you the evidence was overwhelming. Now perhaps we can proceed with justice." "Absolutely," Jake agreed. "But I found something interesting during my investigation. It seems the cattle theft was just part of a much larger operation. I discovered a camp used by the real thieves, and I found evidence that points to the leader of the whole conspiracy." The crowd had grown larger, and people pressed closer to hear Jake's words. Whitfield shifted nervously, but his greed and curiosity got the better of him. "What kind of evidence?" he asked. Jake pulled out the bag of silver ore he had found at the hidden camp. "This silver ore, along with a note about payment for services. It seems someone has been paying men to steal cattle and frame Apache families for the thefts." Whitfield's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. That's interesting. Do you know who this mastermind might be?" "I have my suspicions," Jake said carefully, "but I need to verify one more thing. Sheriff Bradley, could you bring out the prisoners? I want to ask them about something I discovered." When the 7 sisters were brought out, still bound but now with hope in their eyes, Jake addressed Ayanna directly. "Yesterday you mentioned that your brother works in a silver mine near Tucson. Do you know which mine specifically?" "The Santa Rita mine," she answered. "He has worked there for 6 months, sending money to help our family." Jake turned to face the crowd, holding up the bag of silver ore. "This silver ore came from the Santa Rita mine. I can tell because of the distinctive color and the way it's been processed. The question is, how did it end up in a camp used by cattle thieves?" Whitfield stepped forward quickly. "That proves nothing. Silver ore is common in this territory." "You're right," Jake agreed, "but this note that came with it is more specific." He pulled out the paper he had found. "It's a payment record, and it mentions providing horses and supplies for Indian removal operations." The crowd murmured angrily. The idea of someone paying to frame innocent people for crimes they didn't commit struck them as deeply wrong. Jake continued his careful revelation. I also found a list of Apache families targeted for these false accusations. Ayanna and her sisters are on this list, along with several other families who have been accused of crimes in recent months. Sheriff Bradley looked confused and angry. Are you saying someone has been deliberately framing Apache people for crimes they didn't commit? That's exactly what I'm saying, and I think the person responsible is standing right here in this crowd. Jake's words sent a shock through the assembled townspeople. Everyone began looking around suspiciously, wondering who among them could be capable of such a conspiracy. Whitfield tried to regain control of the situation. This is ridiculous speculation. Even if someone has been framing Apache people, that doesn't prove these particular women are innocent. You're right again, Jake said. So let me present the final piece of evidence. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a telegram. Yesterday evening, I sent a message to the Santa Rita mine asking about Noose, the brother these women were supposedly traveling to see. He held up the telegram for all to see. The mine supervisor confirmed that Noose has been working there for 6 months, just as his sister said. But here's the interesting part. He's never been injured, and he never sent any message asking his sisters to come to him. The crowd's murmur turned into angry voices. If the letter that brought the women to this area was fake, then someone had deliberately lured them into a trap. Jake pressed his advantage. The letter that supposedly came from their brother was written on expensive paper with educated handwriting. It was designed to bring these women to this specific area at this specific time, where they could be framed for cattle theft. Whitfield was sweating now, despite the cool morning air. Even if that's true, it doesn't identify who was responsible. Actually, it does. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out one more piece of evidence, a torn piece of paper he had found at the hidden camp. This is a receipt from the Cedar Ridge General Store dated 2 days ago. It's for supplies purchased by someone preparing for a long journey, ropes, dried food, and camping gear. He handed the receipt to Sheriff Bradley. The name on this receipt is Marcus Whitfield. The crowd exploded into angry shouts. People pushed forward, demanding to know if Whitfield was really behind the conspiracy. The businessman backed away, his face white with panic. "That's ridiculous," he shouted. "Anyone could have forged that receipt." Jake smiled grimly. "Maybe. But here's something that can't be forged." He whistled sharply, and from behind the jail came 2 of Whitfield's own men, their hands bound and their faces grim. "Last night I had a long conversation with these gentlemen," Jake announced. "It seems they got tired of following illegal orders and decided to tell the truth about what's been happening." One of the captured men stepped forward. "Marcus Whitfield has been paying us to steal cattle and blame it on Apache families," he said loudly. "He wanted to clear them out of the territory so he could claim their land for his mining operations." The other man nodded. "We were supposed to make sure these women were hanged as an example to scare other Apache into leaving. Whitfield said it was necessary for progress." Whitfield's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. "You're all lying!" he screamed. "These Apache are dangerous. They need to be removed for everyone's safety." Sheriff Bradley had heard enough. "Marcus Whitfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy, cattle theft, and attempting to frame innocent people for crimes they didn't commit." As the sheriff moved to arrest him, Whitfield pulled a small pistol from his coat. "I won't be taken by ignorant frontier trash," he snarled. But Jake had anticipated this possibility. As Whitfield raised his weapon, Jake's own gun cleared leather with lightning speed. The businessman's shot went wild, and Jake's bullet struck Whitfield's hand, sending the pistol flying. The crowd surged forward, but Jake held up his hand. "Let the law handle this," he said firmly. "We're not a lynch mob." Within an hour, the ropes had been removed from the necks of the 7 Apache sisters, and Marcus Whitfield was locked in the same jail cell they had occupied. His conspiracy was fully exposed, and word was already spreading to other towns about the systematic campaign to frame innocent Native Americans. Ayanna approached Jake as he prepared to leave town. "You saved our lives," she said simply. "Our people will remember your courage." Jake tipped his hat. "Your people shouldn't have to be grateful for basic justice, but I hope things will be better from now on." Sheriff Bradley shook Jake's hand firmly. "I don't know how to thank you. I came close to making the worst mistake of my career." "Just make sure the truth gets told," Jake replied. "And maybe next time, investigate a little more carefully before you trust someone like Whitfield." As Jake rode out of Cedar Ridge that afternoon, he carried with him letters from Ayanna to her brother, explaining what had happened and assuring him of their safety. The seven sisters would return to their reservation with official documents, clearing them of all charges, and Whitfield's land grab scheme was finished forever. The frontier was still a dangerous place, full of hardship and conflict. But on this particular day, justice had prevailed, and 7 innocent lives had been saved from a terrible fate. For a solitary cowboy who had never asked for anything more than honest work and fair treatment, it was enough to know he had made a difference. Jake Morrison disappeared over the horizon, ready for whatever challenge the frontier might present next, secure in the knowledge that sometimes one person with courage and determination could change the course of history itself.